A good landlord versus a bad landlord. The good, the bad, the ugly. We've been landlords to thousands of tenants, and we like to think we're pretty great landlords, but there are a few bad apples out there. Here's how to spot the difference between a good versus a bad landlord. So what would a good landlord do prior to the beginning of a tenancy? Well, first of all, they're going to be showing the apartment in move-in ready condition. This sets great expectations for the tenant, so the tenant knows exactly how the apartment's going to look when they actually move into it. They're not expecting it to be any different, remodeled, updated, things removed, carpet removed, flooring redone, anything. What they're looking at and what they're seeing is what they're evaluating, and it's what they're going to get. And it's a great way to keep everybody on the same page. Another thing a great landlord's going to do prior to a tenancy is have a great screening process in place. Now that might seem like that works against you as a tenant, but if you're a tenant, remember you're going to have neighbors living in this rental apartment, and you want to make sure those neighbors are screened out. You want to avoid having neighbors that are going to be drug dealers, gang members, unless that's your style and that's where you want to live. A screening process will help eliminate some of the bad tenants from being your bad neighbors, and that's really, really important to a lot of people. The next thing a great landlord is going to do is they're going to have everything done in writing and not just verbally prior to the beginning of a tenancy. So that means they may have a lot of things done verbally, they may take phone calls, they may have discussions with you, but all that stuff that is covered is then recapped in writing or also supplemented in writing. This helps both parties stay on the same page. Confusion and misunderstandings about what was discussed is one of the things that can early on set the tone for a tenancy going in the wrong direction. Now, a bad landlord may make a few mistakes that seem like they're geared towards doing something good-natured and in good faith, but can cause problems later. One of those kind of things is having the tenant be in charge of making repairs or making an apartment move-in ready. So in other words, maybe the landlord says, hey, listen, you repaint the place, you install the carpet, you do the fixing up, my old tenant just moved out, and I'll give you a discount for this month, that month, or I'll work it out with you somehow in the tenancy. Now, that sounds great, and it sounds like it's a creative solution for both parties, and sometimes it is, but those deals can be very, very messy, where each party both ends up feeling like they got shortchanged. The tenant moving in feels that maybe they did way more work or produced way more of value than the landlord ends up discounting or compensating them for. The landlord turns around and thinks that the value that the tenant provided was way less than the tenant did and thinks that they get taken advantage of by providing too much of a discount. Or you end up with a he said, she said situation where both parties thought the other party was going to do something more. Either way, it sounds great on the surface, but it's a huge opportunity for misunderstandings later. The next thing a bad landlord might do is have too relaxed or disorganized of a move-in process. This would be where the exchanging of keys comes in, exchanging of move-in expenses and funds comes in, and maybe it's just too loose and they don't move in on the target date, or they thought they were going to meet at the property, but they ended up needing to be met at the office. Whatever it might be, moving into a new place, moving and packing up all of your belongings, maybe your family and everything, is very, very stressful, and not having a good, organized, and structured process actually causes more stress to most parties, especially the tenant. What are some good questions to ask your next potential landlord? Well, if you're looking for an apartment, some of the important things you need to know is when will the apartment be available for me to move in? How much is the apartment going to be? And if there are any specific policies that come up in rentals that are deal breakers for you. This could be if the landlord does or did not allow or provide laundry on site. Maybe that's a deal breaker for you because you just absolutely cannot, for whatever reason, use a laundromat. It's a deal breaker. You got to have laundry in the home. It can save you a lot of time and effort on both sides, the landlord and the tenant, to know some of these policies up front. So when it comes to agreements, specifically rental agreements, your move-in documentation or your lease agreement, some good landlords and bad landlords are going to have a couple of different ways of approaching this. Good landlords are going to have all of this stuff in writing. Now, it's okay and it's great to have verbal conversations about it, but a bad landlord generally does everything verbally and doesn't reduce things in writing. Again, this starts off seemingly great and very easygoing, but what ends up happening is everything splinters from there as people misremember the original verbal conversation. A good landlord may have those conversations, but they're always reduced to writing. And in those agreements are going to be some basic things like your move-in and move-out dates, your rental amounts, due dates for the rental amount, and some basic policy type stuff. What's included? Utilities, heat, hot water, electricity, air conditioning, internet, whatever might be included or not included, who's responsible for what, as well as exclusions. Some basic rules that the landlord might have that everybody understands before the tenancy is created and agrees to. Those rules might be around animals, smoking policies, that type of thing. I've been asked, is the landlord bad if they don't want to negotiate on rental pricing? For instance, hey landlord, maybe that apartment you're trying to list for $1,500 really isn't worth $1,500 to most people. And where you got to be really careful is you want to make sure as a good landlord, you're treating everybody the same. Could you imagine showing 5 different households or 5 different applicants an apartment, and all these people all have different maybe backgrounds, maybe it's race, religion, or anything like that. And one of those people says, hey, listen, I don't really like this that much. It's in a bad neighborhood, whatever it might be. Would you give me a discount? I'll take it for $1,200 instead of $1,300. And you say yes. Now, how do you think these other 4 families or 4 households might feel when they found out that you gave a discount to somebody else and not them, or never even gave them the opportunity to do it? So you do have to kind of consider that stuff. And what may be a good practice for you would be as a landlord is, if you were going to discount the pricing, is you let everybody have an opportunity that was interested at that apartment at that reduced pricing. So reach back out to everybody, reduce the price, and say, if you're interested now at the new $1,200 reduced price, let me know and I'll be happy to consider you. Is a landlord a bad landlord if they don't reduce the rent on bad circumstances? Now, that's actually a great question. So if you're renting an apartment, or you're going to be renting an apartment and it has maybe a deficiency to it, maybe there's some small issue going on in the apartment where it isn't maybe worth 100% full price, at least temporarily, until that issue is resolved, I think a price reduction is a good idea. You might call it an abatement. Basically, think about it as something for the tenant's inconvenience. So, hey, listen, I know you're moving into this apartment on Thursday, but I just found out the oven on the stove doesn't work. And I know you're probably not going to be baking any cookies the first week that you live there, but it is going to take a week for the parts for the oven to get fixed. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you a rent reduction for that first month of $50 for that small inconvenience for the apartment not being completely intact. How does that sound? That's a great way to get things to roll, and be more than generous on something like that, because again, you're going to continue to have maintenance issues throughout a tenancy. Homes don't get better the longer and more you use them. They only will wear out and have issues. So this is going to set the tone for how you treat your customer, because that's exactly what they are, by realizing, hey, listen, things, especially at the beginning, weren't 100% smooth, so I want to do something that's more than fair for you. So in conclusion, one of the main differences between a good and a bad landlord is having a lot of stuff in writing and having a lot of it structured. So making sure that expectations are well known up front, making sure that even though there's a lot of verbal conversations happening, it's all reduced to writing, so that 6 months or 6 years later, whenever there's a misunderstanding about something, you can go back and look at what your mind was on the same page and the meeting of the minds you had at that time. So 6 years down the road, somebody decides to develop a smoking habit and you said, hey, I said no smoking. No, you didn't. You can say, well, listen, that's not how I remember it. Let's go back and look at the documents we signed. And you can say, yes, see, right here, we both agreed this was a non-smoking apartment. If you'd like to change that, we can talk about it. But as of right now, it is in fact a non-smoking apartment. And that way everybody can go back and see exactly what their meeting of the minds was. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe. We've got your back for all the real estate tips, tricks, and hacks that you're gonna need. In fact, why not check out this video?